Thank you so much. So our final speaker is Cory Labrecque from the School of Medicine and the Center for Ethics. Cory is the Raymond F. Schinazi Scholar in Bioethics and Religious Thought and the director of the Master of Arts in Bioethics program at the Center for Ethics at Emory. He also serves as the co-director of Catholic Studies at Emory University. Dr. Labrecque's research lies at the intersection of, I think, everything. Religion, medicine, biotechnology, environment, and ethics. He's been deeply involved in the ongoing and growing cross-disciplinary medical humanities effort between the School of Medicine, the College of Italian Studies, and the Ethics Center. And he's going to speak a little bit about, in addition to that, the Consortium of Medical Schools, which is collaborating on a new medical student elective as part of the Medicine and Compassion course in the Italian Studies undergraduate summer abroad program, which has been led for some 30 years by Judy Raji-Moore, who is sitting over there. So I invited Cory because I was lucky enough to go to the Italian Studies program 2 years ago as part of their faculty symposium. And if I could, I'd go back every year. It was absolutely fantastic. And I was so struck by how in this amazing setting of Italy, both modern and ancient, we were also having discussions about medicine, ethics, in a totally interdisciplinary way. So thank you, Cory.
As a student, I was very happy being a conformist who bowed to the pressures of my university to hyper-specialize, my alma mater in Montreal, not Emory. But then life kind of took its course, and I was propelled into the arms of interdisciplinary study, which, as you well know, is kind of how things happen for a lot of us. Just a very quick background for me. I was an undergraduate student who took my degree in anatomy and cell biology. I was my class valedictorian. So the understanding in my culture, and I think in Western culture writ large, was that you did well in school, you go on to medicine. That's kind of what you do. Certainly that's what my biology teacher told me. And so I found myself in that particular program headed towards medicine until my grandmother, who I was very close to, became ill and moved rather rapidly through the process of Alzheimer's disease, right, through the pathology. And I remember as an undergraduate student who was just coming to the end of my degree, students and even mentors saying, and I don't think out of malice, I certainly think this was done with all goodness, saying, Cory, this is not the person you once knew, right? There's some discontinuity here. And I struggled with that very much as an undergrad. And I suddenly kind of detached myself from my studies, even though I was very much identified by my studies. I suddenly kind of stepped away from that because I was having a hard time processing all of this. Ended up taking electives in ethics and religion, where I thought my mind would be turned into from a very different kind of perspective, until my medical advisor took me aside one day and said, looking at your transcript here, Cory, what's wrong with you? I'm like, what is it, professor? He's like, all these ethics and religion things, and he called them things. You're having a hard time? And I said, yes, but I'm actually going there because I feel like I am missing language. I'm missing some kind of constructive engagement that I'm just not getting with some of the courses that I'm taking in my own right. And he said, well, maybe your heart is somewhere else. And I said, Professor, you're absolutely right. And then he said, no, that's not what I meant. But I ended up finishing the degree and starting an honors degree in religion because I thought there was a lot of constructive thinking that was happening in that faculty. And sure enough, when the time came for me to decide how to specialize, I refused to relinquish what I had learned in medicine, and I refused to relinquish what I learned in my religions. And so I bound them in the field of bioethics, which I think does not encourage interdisciplinarity, it requires it. And so I took my master's degree in that particular area and wrote a thesis on whether or not patients with Alzheimer's could still be considered persons with a certain bias. Went on to do a PhD in the same kind of area and delighted in this. I think, for a lot of us in interdisciplinary studies, both the mandate and the challenge are one. It's trying to cultivate this sense of constructive listening that I know sounds very rudimentary, but in fact it's very difficult to do. I think all of us as professors know exactly what I'm talking about, right? This constructive listening that's not just about hearing disparate voices, but being able to constructively engage those disparate voices as I stand out of my worldview thinking about deep ethical issues in my own field, right? This is what we try to cultivate in many ways. And it is a bit of an uphill battle, as you can well imagine. There's one thing to talk about its importance. It's another thing to teach, right, how to listen carefully and constructively. Some of the courses that I've been delighting in this kind of endeavor have been both at the undergraduate and graduate level. At the undergraduate level, all of my courses are cross-listed in religion, medicine, ethics, and the environment. And so my students come from all of those fields, science and the humanities, together around one table, which is delightful. It ends up becoming almost a war zone at the beginning. And then it's my mandate in many ways to sift that out, right? One of the courses that I co-taught with Judy was a CFDE course called Humanizing Health, where pre-health, pre-med students came together in this undergraduate class, and we invited professors from as many disciplines as we could muster from around the university to speak to these students about what the relevance, what the significance of X discipline has for the study and practice of medicine. And so Pamela spoke about women's studies, and we had a professor in disability studies, and a professor from history, a professor from English, all of them saying that in the end, this is what wisdom we can offer to you as you're thinking about what it means to be a healthcare provider in the field. That at the end of the day, if you're going to be speaking about human health and human identity, to think that you cannot engage many disciplines is illusory, right? There's something deeply problematic with that, I think. The same kind of motif has been brought up in the Italy studies that Judy has headed for 30 years and that I only had the privilege to be a part of for the last 4 or 5 years. And this is, again, interdisciplinary at its best, and it's interdisciplinary outside of the normal discipline that students know, right? That's what study abroad is to uproot you here, to strengthen your roots elsewhere, right? That kind of motif. And we do speak at the intersection of culture, the arts, the humanities, and what these things have to offer, again, the practice and study of health and medicine. And so you have these students who are engaged, expecting to go into medicine thinking, I think at the beginning, Italy. The food and the culture and the music, all this great stuff. And many of them go that way, and you can hear them always in orientation, right? They're so excited about what they're gonna wear and what they're gonna shop at and so on and so forth. And you're like, you're in for a big surprise. And then they get there, and their feelers kind of go out, and they realize at the end of the day that either they need about 10 different PhDs to become healthcare providers, or at least the skill to be able to engage them constructively from their own discipline's purview. And I think this is what we try to cultivate, right, while we're abroad. You take them out of familiarity, and you bring them into a very different kind of context where they can engage different disciplines at the same time. People have been very attentive to this kind of pedagogy and to the value of that kind of pedagogy, so much so that there is a consortium of medical schools who have come together to say, yeah, this is what our students are lacking in medicine, in the study of medicine. That kind of thing, right? That kind of engagement, that kind of ability to listen to those voices that are usually thought to be either obnoxious or at least not insightful. Right, and this is exactly what we've been doing, I think, abroad with these students who leave, I think, the 6 weeks of the program not only reoriented, perhaps even disoriented, which is a good thing, I think, for us as academics, but also transformed. Understanding that, whoops, perhaps my trajectory is not all this clear anymore, and in many ways it becomes branched, and this is where we want them to go, right, is to appreciate that. Some people have said, really, that interdisciplinary study is just a fancy word for disorientation, or for I'm interested in so many things, therefore I'll do them all and call myself an interdisciplinarian, right? At the graduate level, I have the delight in teaching in the master's program, and as a specialist in religion who's seated in the medical school, I know the challenge of trying to make a voice heard, right, as a significant kind of partner in conversations around health and medicine. And the students who sit around my table when we're facilitating discussions in the field of religion and medicine are either 20-year veterans in the practice of medicine. These are physicians and nurses and so on and so forth. Lawyers, theologians, divinity students who are looking for ordination. And so all of their voices and all of their languages are incredibly different. And I'm always interested to see at the very beginning whether or not somebody says something about Jesus and somebody then gets up and leaves the room, right? About how this is going to go, right, in the venue. And it's actually quite surprising to hear which voice comes from whom. And it reminds me in many ways that I myself need to cultivate that sense of constructive listening, right, which becomes really categorical in many ways. But that's been my experience, I think, across the cuff. I think one of the other challenges, besides the cultivation of this constructive listening for critical analysis, has been kind of heartbreaking, especially for me at Emory, coming out of the Canadian education system, which has a certain kind of tuition package attached to it. And then coming to Emory and realizing that that's a little bit higher than I am used to, like 10 times higher than I am used to. The number of times I've had students in my office, and I suspect that you know what I'm talking about here, saying, so I'm here pre-business, pre-med, pre-law, but I really want to take a class, it's always whispered, or the door is closed. I really want to take a class in religion or Italian or women's studies or theology. And I've had this happen to me just recently. The student pulled out an audio piece and placed it on my desk and said, I'm phoning my parents tonight. Tell me how to argue taking these kinds of electives. And I'm like, oh, the value of interdisciplinary, I don't know how to do this, but in many ways, this is what we need, is that some students kind of yearn for it, knowing that there's a great value to it, but sometimes don't even have the opening to kind of delight in it because of the hyper-specialization that I think in many ways we champion at the university alongside interdisciplinarity. I think we say how much we value interdisciplinarity, and I think we do genuinely at the universities across the board. But then trying to put that into administrative function becomes a whole other kind of challenge, I think, and this is where we find ourselves, both at Emory, right? At the one time valuing specialization, to be sure. My heart fails, I'd like to see a cardiologist. But on the other side, understanding the interdisciplinary value of constructive engagement that we want our students to foster at the same time.